Hello, I'm Peter Miller. I'm so glad you could join me for tonight's journey. Sometimes the night stretches long, and we find ourselves awake when the world sleeps. In those quiet hours, we might feel small, separate from the warmth of day and the comfort of companionship. But when you listen to stories from the past, something shifts. You begin to sense that you are part of an unbroken thread, woven through centuries. Those who came before us also lay awake. They too sought solace in the darkness. They too wondered how to endure. Tonight, I want to offer you my voice as a gentle bridge. A bridge that connects you to a world where survival was not guaranteed, where winter was not a season to endure with central heating and insulated walls, but a test of patience, knowledge, and quiet adaptation. You are not alone in this moment. You belong to a community of souls who cherish stillness, who find peace in reflection. We are awake together, and soon we will rest together. But before we drift, let me share with you a paradox, a secret, hidden in the folds of woolen cloaks and linen undershirts, stitched into the very fabric of life in the frozen north. It is a secret that modern intuition would reject, that our clean, climate-controlled world would find strange, even unsettling. And yet, for the people who sailed the icy seas and settled the barren coasts of Greenland and Iceland, this secret was the difference between survival and silent death in the snow. Here is the paradox. The Vikings, those seafaring explorers and farmers of the North Atlantic, rarely changed their clothes in winter. Not because they were careless, not because they lacked options, but because changing clothes in the cold was dangerous. Because the body, once it had adapted to a layer of wool and linen, had created a fragile equilibrium. And to disturb that equilibrium, to strip away those layers even briefly, was to invite cold into the core, to let heat escape faster than the body could recover. Clothing, you see, was not separate from the body. It was part of it, an extension of skin, a second epidermis, woven from sheep and flax, designed not to be swapped out like a modern outfit, but to be inhabited day after day, night after night, until the season turned and the sun returned. Tonight, we will walk slowly through this world. We will not rush. There is no urgency here, only understanding. We will explore three silent enemies that shaped how people dressed, how they moved, how they survived: moisture, sweat, and wind. These are not the dramatic villains of winter. They do not announce themselves with blizzards or frostbite. They work slowly, invisibly, pulling heat from the body degree by degree until the body can no longer fight back. And as we move through this story, I want you to feel the weight of wool on your shoulders, the dampness creeping through linen against your skin, the faint, persistent wind that finds every gap, every opening, every moment of carelessness. I want you to understand what it meant to wear the same layers, day after day, not as a failure of hygiene, but as an act of survival. So settle in. Let the modern world fall away. Let the hum of electricity and the glow of screens fade into the background. We are going back. back to a time when winter was not an inconvenience, but a presence, a force, a teacher. And in that cold, we will find something unexpected. Not just hardship, but ingenuity. Not just suffering, but adaptation. Not just isolation, but the warmth of knowledge passed down, generation to generation, in the simple act of wearing the same wool cloak, the same linen shirt through the long, dark months. The story I am about to share with you unfolds across the settlements of Greenland and Iceland during the height of the Viking Age, roughly between the years 900 and 1100. These were not the Vikings of popular imagination, clad in horned helmets and charging into battle. These were farmers, families, people who had crossed an ocean in search of land, of opportunity, of a chance to build something new. And what they found was a landscape of breathtaking harshness. A place where winter arrived in October and did not release its grip until April, where temperatures plunged to 20 degrees below zero, where winds howled across treeless plains, carrying with them the salt and ice of the North Atlantic. In these places, survival depended not on strength or courage, but on knowledge, on understanding the subtle, invisible forces that governed life and death in the cold, on making choices that seemed counterintuitive, even foolish to outsiders, but which proved themselves through generations of lived experience. The choice not to change clothes was one such choice. And tonight, we will understand why. Let us begin. The first thing you must understand is this. The decision to keep wearing the same clothes was not laziness. It was calculation. A calculation born from watching what happened when someone did not. Imagine you are standing on the coast of Greenland early winter, just as the days begin to shorten and the nights stretch longer than memory. The settlement is small, turf houses, low and dark, their walls built from earth and stone and sod, their roofs covered in grass that will soon be buried under snow. Inside, the air is thick with smoke from the central hearth, and the warmth is not the dry, even heat of a furnace, but a damp, living warmth shared with the breath of cattle and the bodies of family. You have been wearing the same woolen tunic for weeks now. Beneath it, a linen shirt, soft and thin, pressed against your skin. Over it, a cloak, heavy and coarse, fastened at the shoulder with a bronze pin. Your trousers are wool, wrapped tight at the ankles with strips of fabric to keep the cold from climbing up your legs. Your feet are covered in leather shoes, stuffed with dried grass for insulation. This is your winter uniform, and you do not change it. Why? Because your body has already done the work. Over days and weeks, your skin has warmed the linen. The linen has absorbed the faint moisture from your body and passed it outward into the wool. The wool, with its natural oils still intact, has trapped tiny pockets of air between its fibers. Those pockets are warm now, warm with your heat, warm with the slow, steady radiation of your core temperature. To take off that tunic, to strip away that cloak, would be to destroy that microclimate. It would be to expose your skin to air that is far colder than the layer you have just removed. And in the seconds it takes to pull on a new shirt, a new tunic, your body would lose heat faster than it can produce it. You would feel it immediately, a chill, sharp and deep, not just on your skin, but beneath it, in the muscles, in the blood. And then, when you put the new clothes on, your body would have to start over. It would have to warm the fabric from scratch, spending calories, burning energy, pulling heat from your core to create that protective bubble of warmth all over again. In a season when food is scarce and every calorie matters, this is not a small thing. It is a cost, a tax on survival. So, you do not change. You keep the same tunic, the same cloak, the same trousers. You let your body stay adapted. You let the equilibrium hold. But there is more to it than just heat. There is the matter of moisture. And this is where the understanding becomes deeper, more subtle, more strange to modern ears. Moisture is not always visible. It does not always announce itself as wetness. Sometimes it exists as vapor, as humidity suspended in the air, invisible to the eye, but present nonetheless. And in the enclosed spaces where Vikings lived through winter, moisture was everywhere. It rose from the breath of humans and animals. It condensed on the cold stone walls. It seeped into fabric, slowly, silently, until the fabric itself became a sponge. Your woolen tunic, after weeks of wear, is not dry. It cannot be dry. Not in a world where you share your living space with cows and sheep, where every exhale adds moisture to the air, where the only ventilation is a hole in the roof that lets smoke escape and cold air rush in. Your tunic is damp, not soaking, not dripping, but damp in a way that would feel uncomfortable if you touched it with your hand after taking it off. But here is the secret. Your body has learned to live with that dampness. The wool, even when slightly moist, still insulates. It still traps air. It still holds warmth. And more than that, the moisture itself has become part of the system. Because wool, unlike most modern fabrics, has a remarkable property. When it absorbs water vapor from the air, it releases heat. Not much. Not enough to feel like a heater, but enough. Enough to offset the cooling effect of the moisture itself. Enough to keep the microclimate around your skin stable. This is called the heat absorption. It is a chemical process, a molecular dance between the protein structure of wool and the water molecules in the air. And for the Vikings, it was an invisible ally, a source of warmth they did not need to understand scientifically to benefit from. But if you were to take off that damp tunic and put on a fresh one, that alliance would be broken. The new tunic would be dry. It would not release heat as it absorbed moisture. It would simply absorb, pulling moisture from your skin without giving anything back. And in the minutes it took for your body to warm the new fabric, you would be colder, weaker, more vulnerable. So, again, you do not change. You keep the same tunic. You trust the equilibrium. You trust the slow, patient logic of adaptation. And as the days pass, your body becomes accustomed to this state. The dampness no longer feels uncomfortable. It becomes normal, expected, a part of the rhythm of winter life. You sleep in your tunic. You wake in your tunic. You work in your tunic. And slowly, imperceptibly, you stop thinking of it as a garment and start thinking of it as a part of yourself. A second skin, inseparable from the first. This is not neglect. This is not ignorance. This is knowledge, hard-won and carefully preserved. Knowledge passed down from parents to children, from the old to the young, in quiet instructions and unspoken habits. Knowledge that says, in winter, stability matters more than cleanliness. Survival matters more than comfort. Let me take you deeper into this understanding. Let me show you the mechanics of how this system worked, the intricate collaboration between fabric and flesh that kept people alive in temperatures that would kill an unprepared person in hours. The wool used by Vikings was not like modern wool. It came from ancient breeds of sheep, hardy animals that had evolved alongside humans in the harsh climate of Scandinavia. These sheep produced two distinct types of fiber. The outer coat, called tog, was long, coarse, and naturally water-resistant thanks to a high concentration of lanolin. The undercoat, called thel, was fine, soft, and incredibly crimped, creating thousands of tiny air pockets that trapped warmth close to the skin. When Viking women spun this wool into yarn, they did not separate these two fiber types completely. They blended them, creating a yarn that combined the water-shedding properties of the outer coat with the insulating properties of the undercoat. And when they wove this yarn into fabric, they created a material that was, in essence, a biological composite, an engineered textile that could manage both moisture and temperature in ways that modern synthetic fabrics are only now beginning to replicate. But the magic of this fabric only revealed itself over time. When you first put on a woolen tunic, fresh from the loom, it is stiff, scratchy. The fibers have not yet relaxed, not yet conformed to the shape of your body. But as you wear it, day after day, something changes. Your body heat softens the lanolin. The natural oils in the wool begin to migrate, coating the fibers more evenly. The crimp in the thel fibers opens up, creating more air pockets and more insulation. And the fabric, slowly, gradually, becomes custom fitted to you. Not just to the shape of your body, but to the temperature of your body, to the moisture patterns of your body, to the way you move and breathe and exist in space. This process cannot be rushed. It cannot be replicated by simply putting on a new tunic of the same size. Because each tunic, once worn, becomes unique to the person who wears it. It becomes encoded with their specific thermal signature, their specific moisture signature. And to change tunics is to lose that encoding, to force the body to start the process all over again. This is why, when a Viking prepared for winter, they did not think in terms of having multiple outfits to rotate through. They thought in terms of having one outfit, carefully chosen and carefully broken in, that would serve them for the entire season. They invested time in that outfit. They let their body adapt to it, and then they trusted it absolutely to keep them alive. The same principle applied to the linen layer beneath. Linen, made from the fibers of the flax plant, has very different properties from wool. It is smooth, not crimped. It is strong, incredibly strong, stronger when wet than when dry. And most importantly, it is hydrophilic. It loves water. It pulls moisture toward itself, away from the skin, and spreads that moisture across a large surface area where it can evaporate slowly. When you wear a linen shirt under a wool tunic, you create a moisture gradient. The linen pulls sweat and water vapor away from your skin. The wool sitting on top of the linen pulls that moisture outward, absorbing it into its own fibers. And because wool can hold up to 30% of its weight in water without feeling wet, and because it releases heat as it absorbs that water, the system stays balanced. The moisture moves outward, away from your body, but it does not accumulate. It does not create cold spots. It is managed, controlled, rendered harmless. But this system only works if it is left undisturbed. If you take off the linen shirt, even for a few minutes, the moisture gradient collapses. The sweat on your skin, no longer being wicked away, begins to evaporate directly. And evaporation, as any physicist will tell you, is an endothermic process. It requires energy, heat energy, and it takes that energy from your body, cooling you down faster than you can warm yourself back up. This is the danger. Not the cold itself, but the disruption of the system that protects you from the cold. And the Vikings, through generations of experience, learned to avoid that disruption at almost any cost. So you keep the same layers, day after day, week after week. You let your body and your clothing exist in a state of continuous equilibrium. You let them become, in a very real sense, one organism, one system, working together to maintain the narrow temperature range that allows human life to persist in a world that is fundamentally hostile to it. And in doing so, you discover something profound. You discover that survival is not about fighting against the environment. It is about finding ways to work with it, about understanding the rules that govern heat and moisture and wind, and then using those rules to your advantage, about patience, about discipline, about the willingness to accept discomfort in the short term in order to avoid catastrophe in the long term. This is the first lesson of winter clothing, that the body and the fabric are not separate entities. They are partners, collaborators, and like any partnership, they require time to develop trust, to find their rhythm, to learn how to work together effectively. And once that rhythm is established, it should not be broken, not without very good reason, not without understanding the cost. And the cost in winter could be your life. Now, imagine a young woman in a settlement at the edge of the known world. She is perhaps 20 years old, married to a farmer, mother to a small child. Her name, for the purposes of our story, is Astrid. She lives in a turf house that she helped build with her own hands, cutting squares of sod from the hillside, stacking them into walls 3 feet thick, roofing them with driftwood beams and more sod. The house is dark, even at midday. The only light comes from the hearth fire and a small hole in the roof through which smoke escapes. Astrid wears the same dress she put on in late September when the first snows began to fall. It is made of wool, dyed a deep brown with oak bark. Under it, she wears a linen shift that was once white, but is now the color of smoke. Over the dress, when she goes outside, she wraps a heavy cloak woven from the coarsest tog fibers, so thick and oily that water beads on its surface and rolls away. She has not changed this dress in 3 months, and she will not change it for 3 more. Not because she has no other clothes. She does. In a wooden chest at the foot of her bed, she has another dress, another shift, carefully folded and stored. But she does not touch them, because she knows, from watching her mother and her grandmother before her, that to change clothes in the middle of winter is to court danger. Astrid understands this, not through books or formal teaching, but through her body. She knows that when she first put on this dress, back in September, it felt cold, stiff. But now, in December, it feels warm, familiar. It has conformed to her shape. It has absorbed her scent. It has become, in a way that is hard to articulate, part of her. And she knows that if she were to take it off and put on the dress from the chest, she would shiver. She would burn calories she cannot afford to burn. She would disrupt the delicate balance that keeps her and her child alive. So she does not. She keeps the same dress. She brushes it occasionally to remove bits of straw and dirt. She airs it by the fire when it gets too damp. But she does not wash it. She does not replace it. She trusts it. This trust is not blind. It is earned. It is the result of a deep, intuitive understanding of how fabrics behave, how bodies behave, how the two interact in the specific conditions of a northern winter. It is knowledge that has been tested, refined, and passed down through countless generations. And it is knowledge that kept Astrid alive, kept her family alive, kept entire communities alive in places where the margin for error was razor thin. So when we ask why Vikings rarely changed clothes in winter, we are not asking about laziness or lack of hygiene. We are asking about a calculated survival strategy, a strategy that prioritized thermal stability over cleanliness, that valued equilibrium over novelty, that understood that in the battle against cold, the best weapon was patience. And as we move forward into the next part of our story, we will see how this strategy played out in the face of specific challenges. How it helped people manage not just cold, but the invisible enemies that worked alongside cold to drain warmth from the body. How it shaped daily life, daily decisions, daily survival. But for now, simply hold this image in your mind. A person wearing the same clothes, day after day, not as a burden, but as a choice, a deliberate, informed choice to let the body and the clothing work together, undisturbed, toward the single goal that mattered most, staying alive until spring. Let us continue. Now, let us speak of moisture in a different way, not as something you can see or feel directly, but as a force, a presence, an invisible hand that reaches into your clothes and alters their very nature. Moisture does not make you cold immediately. That is the danger. That is why it is so easy to underestimate. A sudden gust of wind, a plunge into icy water, these things make their threat known instantly. Your body reacts. You shiver, you gasp. You know you are in danger. But moisture works slowly. It creeps. It infiltrates. It changes the fabric around you in ways that are subtle, gradual, almost imperceptible, until suddenly you realize you are colder than you should be. And by then, it may be too late. Let me explain. Wool, as I mentioned, is a remarkable material. Its fibers are not smooth like silk or straight like linen. They are crimped, coiled, full of tiny bends and twists. These crimps create spaces, gaps, pockets of air. And air, when it is still, is one of the best insulators in the world. Better than water, better than most solids. Air trapped between the fibers of wool is what keeps you warm. But water is different. Water conducts heat. It pulls heat away from your body and carries it outward into the environment. And water is 25 times more conductive than air. 25 times. So when moisture begins to fill those tiny air pockets in your wool, it does not just make the fabric heavy, it transforms it. It turns your insulation into a conductor. It builds a bridge, a thermal bridge, between your body and the cold world outside. And heat begins to flow across that bridge, faster than it would have if the wool had stayed dry. This is why wet wool, even though it still provides some warmth, is not the same as dry wool. It is weaker, less effective, a compromised defense. But here is the complexity. In the Viking world, wool was rarely completely dry. Not in the sense we think of dryness today, because the environments they lived in, the turf houses, the longhouses, the ships at sea, were all humid. Constantly, persistently humid. Moisture was not an event. It was a condition, a background state of existence. And so the question was, never, how do we keep wool completely dry? The question was, how do we manage the moisture so that it does not overwhelm us? And the answer, once again, was stability. Do not disrupt the system. Do not create sudden changes. Let the wool absorb moisture slowly at the same rate that it releases heat through sorption. Let the layers work together, with the linen next to your skin pulling moisture away from your body, and the wool on the outside managing the transition from damp interior to cold exterior. This is why the Vikings used linen as their base layer. Linen, made from the fibers of the flax plant, is different from wool. It does not insulate well. It does not trap air. But it has another property, one that is just as important. It wicks moisture. It pulls liquid away from your skin and spreads it across the surface of the fabric, where it can evaporate slowly or transfer to the next layer. When you sweat, even lightly, even just from the warmth of sleeping under a pile of furs, that sweat does not pool against your skin. The linen absorbs it. The linen holds it temporarily and then releases it outward into the wool. And the wool, with its ability to absorb moisture without feeling wet, takes on that burden without complaint. This is the system. This is the collaboration of fabrics. And it only works if the layers are left in place, if they are allowed to establish their rhythm, their equilibrium. But what happens if you disrupt it? What happens if you strip off the linen shirt because it feels damp, because you want something dry and fresh against your skin. You create a problem, because now, suddenly, your skin is exposed. The moisture that the linen was holding is still there on your skin, and without the linen to wick it away, it begins to evaporate. And evaporation, as any scientist will tell you, is a cooling process. It is how your body cools itself on a hot day. It is effective, too effective in winter. When sweat evaporates from your skin in a cold environment, it pulls heat with it, a lot of heat. The latent heat of vaporization, they call it. And your core temperature, which your body works so hard to maintain, begins to drop. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, degree by degree. And then, when you pull on a new linen shirt, a dry one, it too begins to absorb moisture. But this time, the moisture is not being managed by the system. It is being pulled directly from your skin, in a rush, in an imbalance. And you feel it, a chill, a deep, penetrating chill that seems to come from within. This is why changing clothes in winter was dangerous, not because of the cold air itself, but because of what happened at the boundary between your body and the world. Because that boundary, that interface, was where the real battle was fought. And stability, more than cleanliness, more than freshness, was the key to winning. Let me take you deeper into this idea. Let me show you how moisture moved through the Viking world, how it shaped their choices, their habits, their very survival. In the turf houses of Greenland, families lived close together, very close. Humans and animals shared the same space, breathing the same air. The cattle, brought inside to protect them from the cold, exhaled moisture with every breath. Warm, humid breath that rose into the air and condensed on the cold walls, dripping down in slow rivulets, pooling on the floor. The people, too, exhaled moisture. With every breath, with every sigh, they added to the humidity of the room. And when they slept, packed together under furs and blankets, they sweated. Not the heavy sweat of exertion, but the faint, continuous sweat of a body at rest in a warm space. And that sweat, over the course of a night, could amount to a liter or more. A liter of water released into the air, absorbed by clothing, by bedding, by the very walls themselves. This was the environment, humid, enclosed, inescapable. And in this environment, the Vikings learned to live with dampness. They learned that dry was not a realistic goal. Dry was a summer luxury. In winter, the goal was managed dampness, controlled dampness, dampness that did not turn into cold. And this is where the choice of fabric mattered so much. Wool, with its crimped fibers and natural oils, could absorb moisture and still function. It could hold water vapor in its core without letting that moisture reach the surface. It could keep the air pockets intact, even when the fibers themselves were slightly damp. But if you washed that wool too often, if you stripped away the lanolin, the natural grease that coated the fibers, then the wool lost its power. It became like any other fabric. It absorbed moisture and turned cold. It lost the ability to manage dampness. It became a liability. This is why the Vikings did not wash their outer wool layers. Not because they were dirty or careless, but because washing would have destroyed the very properties that made the wool effective. The lanolin was not dirt. It was protection. It was a molecular shield, a hydrophobic barrier that kept water from penetrating too deeply, that allowed the wool to shed rain and snow and sea spray without becoming soaked. And so, once again, the choice was made to keep the same clothes, to let the lanolin stay in place, to let the wool do its work, day after day, week after week, without interference. But there was another layer to this, another reason to avoid changing clothes, and it had to do with the way the body itself adapted to the cold. When you first put on a layer of clothing, your body must warm it. It must transfer heat from your core, through your skin, into the fabric, until the fabric reaches a temperature close to your body temperature. This takes energy, calories, metabolic fuel, but once the fabric is warm, once it has reached equilibrium, your body no longer needs to work as hard. The heat loss slows, the system stabilizes, and your body can focus its energy on other things, on moving, on thinking, on simply staying alive. But if you take off that warm fabric and put on something new, something cold, your body must start over. It must spend energy all over again, warming the new fabric from the temperature of the environment, which might be far below freezing, up to the temperature of your skin. And in winter, when food was scarce, when every calorie counted, this was not a trivial expense. It was a real cost, a measurable drain on your body's reserves. So the Vikings, whether they understood the thermodynamics or not, made the practical choice. They kept the same clothes. They let their bodies stay adapted. They conserved their energy for the things that mattered more. And in doing so, they discovered something that modern science has only recently begun to appreciate, that the relationship between clothing and the body is not one way. It is not just the clothing protecting the body. It is the body and the clothing working together, creating a shared system, a shared warmth, a shared survival. Let me give you a specific example. An example drawn from the archaeological record, from the frozen graves where clothing has been preserved for 1,000 years, telling us stories about how it was used, how it was worn, how it was lived in. In the year 983, a wealthy woman was buried at Herjolfsnes in Greenland. She was wrapped in layers of clothing, the same layers she had worn in life. When archaeologists excavated her grave in the early 20th century, they found that her woolen dress was not clean. It was stained with soot from hearth fires. It was worn thin at the elbows and the hem, and it was, even after 1,000 years, still slightly oily to the touch. The lanolin had never been washed away. This was not a burial shroud. This was her actual clothing, the dress she wore through the winter, through the spring, through the cycles of life and death that defined existence in Greenland. And the fact that it was oily, that it was stained, that it showed signs of long, continuous wear, tells us something important. It tells us that she, like Astrid, like all the women and men of her community, understood that the clothing's effectiveness depended on leaving it alone, on letting it accumulate the oils and the moisture patterns, and the thermal memory that made it an effective barrier against the cold. Modern conservation scientists who have studied these garments have been struck by their sophistication. The weave is tight, but not too tight, allowing for air circulation while still blocking wind. The fibers are blended in specific ratios, balancing insulation with durability. And the evidence of wear, the patterns of abrasion and staining, suggest that these garments were worn for extended periods without washing. This is not evidence of poor hygiene. This is evidence of deep understanding. Understanding that in the specific context of a northern winter, cleanliness as we define it was less important than thermal stability. That the oils and the moisture and even the dirt served a purpose, that they were part of the system, not contaminants to be removed. And so the woman of Herjolfsnes wore her dress. Day after day, month after month, she let it become heavy with lanolin. She let it darken with smoke. She let it conform to her body until it fit like a second skin. And in doing so, she stayed warm. She stayed alive. She raised children and tended animals and preserved her family through winters that would have killed anyone who tried to fight against the logic of the environment. This is what moisture teaches us. That warmth is not about staying dry in the absolute sense. It is about managing moisture in a way that does not compromise the system. It is about understanding that water in the right context, at the right concentration, can actually help you stay warm through the chemical process of sorption. And it is about having the discipline to leave the system alone, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when every modern instinct screams at you to change, to wash, to refresh. Because in winter, comfort is not the goal. Survival is the goal. And survival requires a different set of priorities. Now, let us turn our attention to a specific phenomenon that was well known to Viking communities, but has been largely forgotten in the modern world. This is the phenomenon of what I will call moisture inertia, the tendency of a moisture-saturated system to resist change. Over weeks, your tunic creates a moisture map unique to your body. It reaches a stable equilibrium where the fibers hold onto water molecules tight, resisting change. To dry this wool completely would require intense heat, more than a winter fire can safely provide. So the moisture stays, and your body adapts to it, calibrating your internal thermostat to this specific constant dampness. So, the moisture stays. It persists. It becomes a permanent feature of the garment. And here is the critical point. Your body adapts to this. Your skin, your sweat glands, your thermal regulation systems, they all calibrate themselves to the specific moisture level of the garment you are wearing. They learn to expect a certain level of dampness. They learn to compensate for it. They adjust their output so that the system stays balanced. But if you change garments, if you put on a dry tunic, your body does not immediately recalibrate. It continues to sweat at the rate it had been sweating. It continues to produce heat at the rate it had been producing heat. And suddenly, the system is out of balance. The new garment absorbs moisture too quickly. It pulls heat away too quickly, and you feel colder, not warmer. This is moisture inertia. the tendency of an established moisture system to resist change, and the tendency of the body to resist recalibrating to a new moisture system. And the Vikings, through experience, learned to respect this inertia. They learned that fighting it was counterproductive, that the best strategy was to establish a moisture equilibrium early in the winter, and then maintain it with as little disruption as possible until the season ended. This meant wearing the same clothes. It meant accepting dampness as a constant. It meant trusting that the wool would manage the moisture, that the linen would wick it away from the skin, that the body would adapt. And for the most part, it worked. But there were exceptions. There were moments when the moisture became too much, when the system began to fail, when intervention was necessary. And in those moments, the Vikings had strategies. Not strategies of changing clothes, but strategies of managing moisture within the existing system. When the dampness became too much, they didn't change. They maintained. They might stand in the smoke of the hearth, letting the dry heat and soot coat the fibers. Or they might let the strong wind scour the moisture from their outer layers. At night, the radiant heat of the fire would gently reset the system while they slept. It was a rhythm of maintenance, not replacement, working with the elements to keep the equilibrium holding for one more day. This was a rhythm, a cycle, a way of living with moisture that acknowledged its presence, respected its power, but refused to let it dominate. And it was a rhythm that required the same clothes, day after day, because changing clothes would have broken the cycle, would have disrupted the careful calibration that allowed the system to function. So when we ask why Vikings rarely changed clothes in winter, part of the answer is this: because moisture, that quiet enemy, was best managed through consistency, through establishing a stable relationship between body, fabric, and environment, and then maintaining that relationship with as little disruption as possible. And in that maintenance, in that daily, patient work of keeping the system balanced, the Vikings found a way to survive in a world that offered no second chances, no room for error. Let us continue deeper into the cold. Sweat, we think, is what happens when we work hard, when we run, when we labor, when we push our bodies to their limits. We associate sweat with exertion, with heat, with the need to cool down. But in the Viking winter, sweat was something else. It was not the result of effort. It was the result of simply existing. Let me explain. Your body is always producing heat. Even when you are sitting still, even when you are sleeping, your metabolism is burning fuel, converting calories into warmth. This is how you stay alive. This is how your core temperature remains steady at around 37 degrees Celsius, even when the world around you is far colder. But heat production comes with a byproduct: moisture. Because when your body burns fuel, it does not burn it perfectly. There are inefficiencies, losses, chemical reactions that produce water vapor as a side effect. And this water vapor must go somewhere. It must be released, expelled, evaporated. In summer, this is not a problem. The moisture evaporates from your skin, cooling you down, keeping you comfortable. But in winter, in an enclosed space, surrounded by layers of fabric, that moisture does not evaporate so easily. It lingers, it accumulates. It saturates the linen against your skin, the wool around your torso, the air itself. And this is sweat without effort. This is the slow, continuous seepage of moisture that happens not because you are working, but because you are alive, because your body is warm and the air is cold. And the laws of thermodynamics demand that moisture move from high concentration to low. In the turf houses, where families slept together under piles of furs, this was especially pronounced. The warmth of multiple bodies, pressed close, created a microclimate, a humid, still pocket of air that held moisture like a sponge. And over the course of a night, each person could release a liter or more of water vapor just from breathing, just from the faint perspiration of a body at rest. When you woke in the morning, your linen shirt would be damp, not soaking, not dripping, but noticeably moist. You could feel it against your skin, cool and slightly clammy. And your first instinct, your modern instinct, might be to take it off, to find something dry. But the Vikings did not do this, because they understood something that we have forgotten, that the dampness in the linen was not dangerous. Not yet. Not as long as it stayed within the system. Not as long as the wool outside was managing it, absorbing it, holding it in a way that did not compromise the insulation. The danger came not from the dampness itself, but from exposing that dampness to the cold. Because if you took off the damp linen shirt, if you exposed your skin to the cold air, the moisture on your skin would begin to evaporate. And evaporation, as I said before, is a powerful cooling force. In a matter of seconds, your core temperature could drop. Not enough to kill you, not immediately, but enough to trigger a response. Your body would constrict the blood vessels in your skin, pulling warmth away from your extremities to protect your vital organs. You would begin to shiver, burning calories at an accelerated rate to generate heat. And in a season when food was limited, when every calorie was precious, this was a cost you could not afford. So instead, you left the damp linen shirt on. You trusted the system. You let the wool continue to absorb the moisture, slowly, without disruption. And as the day progressed, as you moved and worked and generated more heat, the dampness would migrate outward, away from your skin, into the outer layers, where it could dissipate more safely. This was the rhythm of winter dressing. Not dry, then wet, then dry again, but a continuous spectrum of dampness, managed and controlled, never allowed to reach the extreme of either complete saturation or complete dryness. And there was another aspect to this, another reason why sweat, even without effort, had to be managed carefully. In the longhouses, where fires burned continuously, the air was not uniformly warm. Near the fire, it could be almost hot, but a few feet away in the shadows, it was cold. And if you sat near the fire, warming yourself, your body would respond by opening the pores, by allowing a little more moisture to evaporate, to cool you down. But then, when you moved away from the fire, back into the cold part of the room, that moisture would still be there, on your skin, in your linen. And suddenly, what had been a cooling mechanism became a chilling mechanism. The moisture, now exposed to cold air, began to evaporate faster, pulling heat with it, making you colder than you had been before you approached the fire. This is why the Vikings were careful about how they moved around the interior spaces, why they did not rush from warmth to cold and back again. Because every transition, every change in environment was a moment of vulnerability, a moment when the system could be disrupted, when heat could be lost, when the balance could tip toward danger. And once again, the solution was stability. Do not change clothes. Do not expose skin unnecessarily. Do not create sudden shifts in temperature or moisture. Let the layers do their work. Let the body adapt. Let the system hold. But let me take you deeper. Let me show you what sweat meant for those who had to venture outside into the full force of winter. Imagine you are part of a small group setting out to check trap lines, to hunt for fresh meat, to gather firewood. The work is not strenuous, but it requires movement. Walking through snow, bending to set or check traps, carrying bundles of wood back to the settlement. Your body, in response to this movement, begins to generate more heat. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles burn more fuel. And your body, trying to prevent overheating, opens the floodgates of perspiration. But you are wearing layers, linen against your skin, wool over that, a cloak over everything, and the moisture from your sweat cannot escape easily. It is trapped, held between the layers, saturating the linen, beginning to seep into the wool. At first, this is not a problem. You are still moving, still generating heat. The moisture is uncomfortable, but not dangerous. You finish your work. You turn back toward the settlement. And then the wind picks up. The wind, cutting across the open snow, finds every gap in your clothing. It slips under the edge of your cloak, between the folds of your tunic, through the weave of the wool itself. And when it touches the damp fabric, it accelerates the evaporation. It pulls the moisture out of the wool, out of the linen, and in doing so, it pulls heat out of your body. You feel it immediately, a sudden, sharp chill, not on the surface, but deeper, in your chest, in your core. You begin to shiver, violently, uncontrollably. Your body is fighting to generate heat, to compensate for the loss. But it is losing the battle. This is the danger of sweat in winter. Not the sweat itself, but what happens when you stop moving, when the wind finds you, when the moisture that was once benign becomes a vector for heat loss. And this is why the Vikings, when they ventured out, did so carefully. They did not work to the point of heavy sweating. They paced themselves. They moved steadily, but not frantically. They kept their exertion below the threshold that would trigger the kind of sweating that could turn deadly. And when they returned to the settlement, they did not immediately strip off their damp clothes, because doing so, in the cold air, would trigger the same flash evaporation, the same rapid heat loss. Instead, they stayed clothed. They sat near the fire, but not too close. They let their bodies warm gradually, and as they warmed, they let the moisture in their clothes dry slowly from the inside out, driven by the heat of their own bodies, rather than the sudden shock of dry heat from the fire. This patience, this discipline, was what separated those who survived from those who did not. Because in winter, impatience could kill. Rushing could kill. The desire for immediate comfort, for a quick fix, could lead to hypothermia, to frostbite, to a slow, quiet death in the snow. And so, they learned to live with sweat, to accept it, to manage it, to make it part of the rhythm of winter life, rather than something to be avoided or eliminated. And in doing so, they discovered a deeper truth, that the body and the environment are not separate. They are connected. They are in constant communication, constantly negotiating, constantly adjusting. And the clothing, the layers of wool and linen, are the mediators of that negotiation. They are not barriers. They are interfaces, places where the body and the world meet, where heat and moisture and air are exchanged, managed, balanced. Let me tell you about a practice that illustrates this understanding perfectly. A practice that seems strange, even counterintuitive to modern sensibilities, but which made perfect sense in the context of Viking winter survival. In some settlements, particularly those in Iceland and Greenland, the Vikings built structures called sweat lodges. These were small enclosed spaces, heated with hot rocks and steam, similar to the saunas of Finland. And people would enter these spaces deliberately, intentionally to sweat. This seems paradoxical. Why would you deliberately induce sweating when sweat is one of the enemies of winter survival? The answer lies in control. In the sweat lodge, sweating happened in a controlled environment. The moisture was produced rapidly, but it was also expelled rapidly through the intense heat. And when a person emerged from the sweat lodge, their skin was clean. The pores were open. The dead skin cells and the oil and the accumulated grime had been washed away by sweat and heat. And then, before the cold could penetrate, they would quickly dry themselves with cloth, wrap themselves in their clothing, which had been kept warm by the fire, and return to the main house. The transition was quick. The exposure was minimal. And the result was that their skin was cleaner, healthier, less prone to infection or irritation. But here is the key. They did not change their clothes after this process. They put the same linen shirt back on, the same wool tunic, because the sweat lodge was not about starting fresh. It was about maintaining the system, about keeping the body functional within the constraints of winter, without disrupting the thermal equilibrium that had been so carefully established. This practice reveals something profound about the Viking understanding of hygiene. They did not equate cleanliness with changing clothes. They equated it with managing the body itself, with keeping the skin healthy, the pores clear, the risk of infection low. And they understood that this could be achieved without constantly swapping out garments. In fact, there is evidence from written sources that Vikings were scrupulous about personal grooming. The Anglo-Saxon chronicler John of Wallingford, writing in the early 13th century, but describing events from several centuries earlier, complained that Viking men bathed every Saturday and combed their hair daily, making them irresistibly attractive to English women. This was meant as a criticism, but what it reveals is that the Vikings took personal cleanliness seriously. They just had a different understanding of what that meant. For them, cleanliness was about the body, not the clothes. And in winter, when changing clothes carried significant risks, they focused their hygiene efforts on what could be safely managed: washing the face and hands, combing the hair, cleaning the teeth with specialized picks, using the sweat lodge to cleanse the skin, but leaving the clothing layers intact, undisturbed, because those layers were doing essential work that could not be easily replicated. Now, let us return to our friend Astrid. It is deep winter now, January perhaps, and she has been wearing the same dress for 4 months. The linen shift beneath is grey with smoke and damp with the accumulated moisture of countless nights sleeping near the fire. She can feel it against her skin, cool and clammy, especially in the mornings before her body heat has warmed it. She knows she could change. She has another shift in the chest, but she also knows what would happen if she did. She knows that the moment she pulled off the damp shift, the cold air in the house would make her shiver. She knows that her baby, nursing at her breast, would feel the chill through her body and cry. She knows that it would take time, precious time, to warm the new shift, and during that time she would be burning calories she cannot spare. So she does not change. Instead, she does what her mother taught her. Every few days, she takes off her outer dress, just for a few minutes, while staying near the fire. She holds the linen shift over the smoke, letting the heat dry it slightly, letting the carbon particles from the smoke coat the fibers and give them a fresh, slightly hydrophobic surface. Then she puts the dress back on quickly and goes about her day. This is not changing clothes. This is maintaining them. It is a subtle but crucial distinction. And it is a distinction that allowed Astrid and countless others like her to survive winters that would have killed anyone who did not understand the rules. The rule about sweat is this: it is inevitable. In winter, in an enclosed space, in a body that is producing heat to stay alive, sweat will happen. The question is not how to prevent it, but how to manage it, how to let it be absorbed by the linen, transferred to the wool, and slowly released into the air, without ever creating a moment of crisis, a moment when the body is exposed and vulnerable. And the answer, time and again, comes back to the same principle: stability. Keep the same clothes. Trust the system. Let the layers work together, day after day, absorbing, transferring, releasing, in a rhythm that is slow and patient and deeply effective. This is what sweat teaches us. That survival in winter is not about staying dry. It is about staying balanced, about working with the moisture rather than against it, about understanding that the human body, in its wisdom, will produce sweat, and that the clothing system, in its wisdom, can manage that sweat, as long as the system is not disrupted. Let us continue our journey, deeper into the mechanics of survival, where we will meet the third enemy, the wind. Wind, in the modern world, is an inconvenience. It musses your hair. It makes you hold onto your hat. It whistles through poorly sealed windows. But in the Viking world, wind was something else entirely. It was a predator, silent, invisible, relentless. Wind does not need to be strong to be dangerous. It does not need to howl and roar and announce its presence. Even a gentle breeze, a whisper of movement across your skin, can strip away warmth faster than your body can replace it. This is called convective heat loss, and it is one of the most efficient ways for the body to lose temperature. Here is how it works. Your body, through metabolism, generates heat. That heat radiates outward from your core, through your blood, to your skin, and at the surface of your skin, it creates a thin layer of warm air, or boundary layer, scientists call it, a cushion of stillness held in place by the friction between air and skin. This layer is precious. It is your first line of defense. As long as it stays in place, your body does not have to work as hard to stay warm. The warm air acts as insulation, slowing the transfer of heat from your skin to the environment. But wind destroys this layer. Wind sweeps it away, replacing it with cold air from the environment. And your body, sensing the loss, works harder to warm the new air. But before it can, the wind sweeps that away too, and the cycle repeats over and over, faster than your metabolism can keep up. This is wind chill, not a measure of how cold the air is, but a measure of how fast your body loses heat to that air. And in the North Atlantic, where winds blew constantly, sweeping across ice and open water, carrying with them the chill of the Arctic, wind chill was a constant threat. The Vikings understood this. They may not have had the scientific language, but they knew the reality. They knew that standing still in a gentle breeze could be more dangerous than working hard in still air. They knew that the difference between survival and death could be as simple as finding shelter from the wind or failing to. And this understanding shaped how they dressed. Because their clothing was not just about insulation. It was about creating a barrier, a shield, a layer between their bodies and the wind that would not just slow the wind, but stop it entirely. The outermost layer of Viking winter clothing was almost always a cloak, a heavy, thick cloak made from tightly woven wool, fastened at the shoulder with a large pin or brooch. This cloak was not snug. It did not hug the body. It draped, loose and flowing, creating a gap of air between itself and the layers beneath. This gap was intentional, because still air, as I said before, is an excellent insulator. And the cloak, by creating a pocket of still air around the body, added an extra layer of protection. The wind could not penetrate the wool easily, and even if a little air did slip through, it would be slowed, diffused, its force broken before it reached the layers closer to the skin. But the cloak alone was not enough, because wind, like water, finds the path of least resistance. It seeks out gaps, openings, weaknesses in the armor. And the Vikings, through experience, learned where those weaknesses were and how to seal them. The neck was one such weakness, a large opening where the cloak fell away from the body, where cold air could rush in and down, chilling the chest, the back, the core. To counter this, the Vikings wore their cloaks high, pinned tightly at the shoulder, and often added a scarf or a second layer of fabric around the neck, filling the gap, blocking the wind. The wrists were another vulnerability. The sleeves of the tunic, even if they extended to the wrist, could still allow air to slip in, especially during movement, especially when reaching or lifting or working. And so the Vikings wore tight cuffs or wrapped their wrists with strips of cloth, sealing the openings, preventing the wind from finding its way inside. And the ankles, the gap between the bottom of the trousers and the top of the shoes. This was perhaps the most dangerous opening of all, because cold air, being denser than warm air, sinks, and if there was a gap at the ankles, cold air would flow in from below, rising up the legs, creating a chimney effect that pulled warmth out through the neck. To prevent this, the Vikings used leg wraps, long strips of wool or linen, wound tightly around the lower leg, from the ankle to just below the knee. These wraps served multiple purposes. They kept the trousers in place. They provided extra insulation. And most importantly, they sealed the gap. They turned the legs into a closed system, where the only air that moved was the air warmed by the body itself. This attention to detail, this obsession with eliminating gaps, was not vanity. It was survival. Because in a world where wind was constant, where even a moment of carelessness could lead to frostbite or worse, every opening mattered. Every seal mattered. Every choice about how to dress, how to move, how to position the body relative to the wind mattered. But here is the deeper point. The point that brings us back to the question of why the Vikings rarely changed clothes in winter. Every time you take off a layer, every time you expose your body to the air, you create an opening. You break the seal. You let the wind in. And in that moment, even if you are indoors, even if the wind is not strong, the air itself is cold, colder than your skin. And it will flow in, seeking equilibrium, pulling warmth away from your body faster than you can replace it. This is why the act of changing clothes was dangerous, not because of the cold outside, but because of the disruption it caused. Because in the seconds or minutes it took to remove one garment and put on another, your body was exposed, vulnerable, open to the wind or to the still cold air that acted like wind, rushing in to fill the vacuum of warmth. And even if you were quick, even if you changed as fast as you could, the damage was done. The boundary layer of warm air around your skin was gone. The microclimate you had spent days building was destroyed, and your body had to start over, warming the new layers, warming the air between them, rebuilding the system from scratch. This cost energy, calories, heat, and in winter, these were resources you could not afford to waste. So the Vikings made the choice to keep their clothes on, to live with the dampness, the smell, the discomfort. Because discomfort was preferable to danger. Stability was preferable to disruption. And the seal, once established, was too precious to break. Let me give you an example. A story, not of any particular individual, but of a type, a composite of experiences passed down through saga and oral tradition. A farmer living on the edge of a settlement in Greenland. His turf house is small, shared with his wife, his 2 children, and 3 sheep brought inside for the winter. The air inside is thick, smoky, humid. The walls sweat with condensation. The floor is damp earth, covered with straw that is replaced every few weeks when it becomes too soiled. He wears the same woolen tunic he put on in late autumn. Beneath it, a linen shirt, now grey with smoke and stained with sweat. Over it, a cloak, heavy and dark, that he wraps around himself when he ventures outside. One morning, he wakes to find that his tunic is damp, not from sweat, but from the moisture in the air, condensed overnight against the wool. He considers changing. He has another tunic folded in a chest at the foot of the bed. It is cleaner, drier, fresher, but he does not change because he knows what will happen if he does. He knows that the moment he pulls off the damp tunic, the cold air in the room, even though it is warmed by the fire, will rush against his skin. He knows that his body, deprived of its outer layer, will lose heat faster than it can generate it. He knows that when he pulls on the new tunic, it will be cold, stiff, unfamiliar to his skin, and it will take time, precious time, for his body to warm it, to make it part of the system again. So he leaves the damp tunic on. He wraps the cloak tighter around his shoulders. He steps outside into the wind and lets the wind itself do the work. Because as he moves, as he checks the traps, as he gathers firewood, the wind pulls the moisture out of the wool, drying it slowly from the outside in. And by the time he returns, the tunic is drier than it was. Not completely dry, but dry enough, functional, part of the system once more. This was the logic. This was the rhythm. Not a refusal to change, but a careful, calculated decision about when and how to change. About recognizing that some discomforts were worth tolerating because the alternative was worse. And wind, more than anything, taught this lesson. Wind taught that exposure was dangerous, that every opening was a vulnerability, that the body, once sealed, once protected, should not be unsealed lightly. And so, the Vikings learned to live with their layers, to make peace with them, to let them become extensions of their bodies rather than separate garments to be swapped out at will. This is what wind teaches us, that survival is not about comfort. It is about continuity, about maintaining the system even when the system is uncomfortable, about trusting that the body and the clothing, working together, will find a balance, will create a warmth that is real, even if it is not perfect. Now, let me take you to a specific place and time, a moment when the relationship between wind and clothing became a matter of life and death. It is the winter of 1002, and a small group of Norse settlers has established a camp at a place they call Vinland, on the coast of what we now call Newfoundland. They have sailed from Greenland in the spring, spent the summer exploring, and now winter has caught them. They are far from home, living in temporary structures, waiting for the ice to break so they can sail back. The wind here is different from Greenland. It comes from the south, wet and heavy, laden with moisture from the Atlantic. It does not feel as cold as Greenland wind, but it is more penetrating. It finds its way through fabric more easily. It makes the clothing damp, not with sweat, but with condensation from the air itself. One of the men, whose name has been lost to history, makes a decision that seems sensible. His tunic is soaked with this dampness. He can feel the cold creeping through it. So he takes it off, hangs it by the fire to dry, and puts on a spare tunic from his sea chest. The new tunic is dry, clean. It feels good against his skin for a few minutes, but then he steps outside to relieve himself. The wind hits him, and something is wrong. He feels colder in the dry tunic than he did in the wet one. Much colder. The wind seems to cut right through the fabric, as if there is no barrier at all. He does not understand why. He does not know that the wet tunic, heavy with moisture, was actually creating a wind barrier. The water in the fibers was blocking the air from penetrating, but the dry tunic, fresh from storage, has not yet developed that barrier. The wind flows through it easily, stripping away his body heat. Within minutes, he is shivering violently. He stumbles back inside, but the damage is done. His core temperature has dropped. His body, in trying to warm the new tunic while simultaneously fighting the wind, has burned through its reserves. He spends the next 2 days huddled by the fire, feverish, weak, barely able to move. He survives, but he learns. And when spring comes and they sail back to Greenland, he tells the story. And the story becomes part of the collective knowledge. Do not change tunics in winter, especially not in wind. Even if the old tunic is wet, it is better than a new one that has not yet become part of your body's system. This is how knowledge was preserved in the Viking world, not through writing, but through stories, through the lived experiences of individuals that became cautionary tales, lessons passed down through generations. And the lesson about wind and clothing was one of the most important, because wind was everywhere on the ships that carried them across the North Atlantic, in the settlements where they built their lives, on the hunting trips and the trading voyages, and the simple daily tasks of fetching water and gathering fuel. Wind was the constant companion, the persistent threat, the force that could turn a minor discomfort into a life-threatening crisis. And the only defense against wind was clothing. But clothing that had been properly sealed. Clothing that had been worn long enough to conform to the body, to develop the moisture barriers, to become an integrated part of the thermal system. Clothing that, once established, should not be changed. This is what wind teaches us. That protection is not just about having the right materials. It is about having those materials in the right state, broken in, adapted, calibrated to your specific body and your specific patterns of movement and heat and moisture. And that changing those materials, even if the replacement seems better, can actually make you more vulnerable. Let us continue into the heart of why changing was not just uncomfortable, but genuinely risky. We have spoken of moisture, of sweat, of wind, and we have seen how each of these forces shaped the way the Vikings dressed, the way they moved, the way they survived. But now, let us bring these threads together. Let us look directly at the act of changing clothes itself and ask, what exactly made it so dangerous? The answer is not simple. It is not a single moment, a single event. It is a cascade, a series of interconnected risks, each one amplifying the others until what begins as a small choice, an innocent act of wanting to feel fresh, becomes a threat to life. Let us walk through it, step by step. Slowly, you are in the turf house. It is midwinter. The days are short, the nights long. Outside, the temperature is well below freezing. Inside, the fire burns, but its warmth is uneven. Near the hearth, it is almost comfortable. Away from it, in the corners, in the sleeping alcoves, it is cold. Not as cold as outside, but cold enough that you can see your breath. You have been wearing the same tunic for weeks. It is damp. It smells of smoke and sweat, and the earthy animal smell of the sheep that share your space. You are tired of it. You want to feel clean. You want to feel dry. So you decide to change. You stand up. You unfasten the cloak from your shoulder, letting it fall to the floor. You reach down, grasp the hem of the tunic, and pull it up over your head. For a moment, you are exposed. Your linen shirt, damp with sweat, clings to your skin. The air in the room, though warmed by the fire, feels cold against your arms, your chest, your back. You feel a shiver, small, involuntary. Your body, sensing the sudden drop in temperature, constricts the blood vessels near your skin, pulling warmth inward to protect your core. Your heart rate increases slightly. You begin to burn more calories, trying to generate heat to replace what you have lost. But you are not done yet. You reach for the new tunic, the one you have kept folded in the chest. It is dry, clean, but it is also cold. Cold from sitting in the unheated corner of the room, away from the fire. You pull it on, and immediately you feel the shock. The fabric, stiff and icy, presses against your skin. It pulls heat away rapidly, conducting it outward into the fibers of the wool, which are eager to absorb warmth, but slow to return it. Your shivering intensifies. You pull the cloak back around your shoulders, trying to trap the warmth that is already escaping. But the damage is done. The boundary layer of warm air that had surrounded your body, carefully built over days and weeks, is gone. The microclimate is destroyed, and now your body must work to rebuild it, to warm the new tunic, to warm the air between the tunic and your skin, to restore the equilibrium. This takes time, minutes at least, perhaps longer. And during that time, you are colder than you would have been if you had simply kept the old tunic on. You are burning more calories. You are losing more heat. You are, in a very real sense, weaker. Now, imagine this happening, not in the relative safety of the turf house, but outside, on a journey, on a hunt, on a day when you are already tired, already hungry, already pushing the limits of your endurance. You stop to rest. You decide to change your shirt because the one you are wearing is soaked with sweat. You strip it off. The wind, which had been a minor annoyance, suddenly becomes a serious threat. It rushes against your bare skin, evaporating the sweat, pulling heat away so fast that you gasp. Your hands, already cold, fumble with the new shirt. You struggle to pull it on. Precious seconds pass. Seconds in which your core temperature is dropping, in which your body is losing the battle. And when you finally get the new shirt on, when you finally seal yourself back into your layers, you are not warmer. You are colder, much colder. Because the new shirt, even though it is dry, is not part of the system yet. It has not been warmed. It has not been integrated. And it will take time you may not have, for your body to bring it into equilibrium. This is the cascade. This is the risk. Not a single catastrophic failure, but a slow, insidious decline. A series of small heat losses, small disruptions that add up over time to something much larger, something deadly. And the Vikings, through experience, learned to recognize this risk. They learned that the discomfort of a damp tunic was nothing compared to the danger of exposure. They learned that stability, even uncomfortable stability, was safer than change. But there is another dimension to this. Another reason why changing clothes was risky. And it has to do with the way the body adapts to cold. When you wear the same clothes for days, for weeks, your body does not just warm the fabric, it adapts to it. Your skin becomes accustomed to the texture, the weight, the dampness. Your nervous system stops sending constant signals of discomfort. The sensation of being damp, of being slightly cold, fades into the background. It becomes normal. This adaptation is not just psychological, it is physiological. Your body adjusts its blood flow, its metabolic rate, its shivering threshold. It finds a new equilibrium, one that takes into account the specific conditions of your clothing, your environment, your level of activity. And this equilibrium is fragile. It depends on consistency, on the body being able to predict, at a subconscious level, what the next moment will feel like. If the conditions are stable, if the clothing is stable, the body can relax. It can conserve energy. It can focus on other things. But if you change the conditions suddenly, if you swap out a damp tunic for a dry one, you disrupt that equilibrium. You force the body to adapt all over again. You reset the process, and during that reset, you are more vulnerable, more sensitive to cold, more likely to shiver, to lose heat, to make mistakes. This is why the Vikings, when they did change clothes, did so carefully. They did not change in the middle of the day, in the middle of activity. They changed at night, near the fire, when they had time to let their bodies adjust, time to rebuild the equilibrium without the added stress of movement or exposure. And even then, they did not change everything at once. They might change the linen shirt, the layer closest to the skin, because that was the layer most affected by sweat. But they would keep the tunic, the cloak, the outer layers. They would preserve as much of the system as possible, minimizing the disruption, keeping the body as stable as they could. This was wisdom, hard-won, carefully preserved wisdom. And it was wisdom that ran counter to our modern instincts, our modern assumptions about cleanliness and comfort. We, in the modern world, change our clothes daily, sometimes multiple times a day. We wash them frequently. We expect them to be dry, fresh, free of odor. And we have the resources to support this expectation. We have central heating. We have washing machines. We have cheap, abundant clothing made from synthetic fibers that dry quickly and insulate even when wet. But the Vikings had none of this. They had wool and linen, and the knowledge passed down from their ancestors. They had the understanding that in winter, the body and the clothing were not separate. They were a single system, and that system, once established, should not be disrupted without good reason. This is what changing clothes teaches us. That survival is not about following the rules we think we know. It is about adapting to the rules of the environment we are in. It is about recognizing that what works in one context, one season, one climate, may not work in another. And it is about having the humility to let go of our assumptions, our preferences, our comfort, in order to do what is necessary. And in the Viking winter, what was necessary was stability, patience, discipline, the willingness to live with discomfort in order to avoid something far worse. Let me show you one more example, drawn from the sagas themselves. In the saga of the Greenlanders, there is a brief mention of a man named Thorhall the Hunter. Thorhall was part of an expedition to Vinland, and he was known for his strength and his skill in harsh conditions. But one winter, according to the saga, he fell ill. The text does not give details, but it mentions that he had changed his clothes unwisely before venturing out into a storm. The saga writers did not need to elaborate. Their audience would have understood immediately what had happened. Thorhall, perhaps feeling uncomfortable in damp clothing, had changed into something dry. And then, caught in a storm, he had lost body heat faster than he could replace it. He survived, but he was weakened, and the saga records this as a cautionary moment, a reminder of what happens when you violate the unspoken rules of winter survival. This is the power of cultural knowledge. It does not need to be written down in detail. It does not need to be explained exhaustively. It simply needs to be remembered, passed on, embedded in stories and habits, and the collective wisdom of the community. And one of those pieces of wisdom, one of the most important, was this: in winter, do not change your clothes, or if you must, do so with great care, great caution, and a deep understanding of the risks involved, because the risks were real. They were not abstract. They were measured in lost heat, lost calories, lost strength. And in a world where the margin between life and death was thin, those losses could be fatal. This is the truth of winter clothing in the Viking world. It was not about appearance. It was not about comfort. It was about survival. And survival required a willingness to live with the same damp, smelly, uncomfortable layers for months at a time. Because those layers, for all their imperfections, were keeping you alive. And changing them, even for what seemed like a good reason, could be the decision that killed you. Let us continue deeper into the philosophy that sustained this practice. You know, my friend, As I sit here in my own quiet room, sharing this with you, I can't help but reflect on my own life. I've walked through a few winters myself, not the frozen tundras of Greenland, but the metaphorical ones. Times when grief wrapped around me like a heavy cloak, or uncertainty seeped in like that silent moisture. And just like those Vikings, I learned that changing everything at once, seeking fresh starts too soon, often left me colder, more exposed. Instead, I held on to the rhythms that worked, the habits that kept me steady, even if they felt worn and damp with old sorrows. It's a human thing, isn't it? We all build our layers, friends, routines, memories, to shield us. And sometimes the wisest act is not to strip them away, but to trust them, to let them adapt with us. As your companion tonight, like an old brother who's seen the storms, I say, embrace that stability. It's not weakness, it's the quiet strength that carries us through. Let it warm you as you drift off. Now we arrive at a concept that challenges the very foundation of modern hygiene. The idea that stability, in certain contexts, is more important than cleanliness. That being clean, in the way we understand it, was not always the priority, was not always even safe. This is difficult for us to accept. We live in a world where cleanliness is next to godliness, where the smell of detergent and the feel of freshly laundered fabric are signs of civilization, of self-respect, of care. We equate dirt with disease, with neglect, with moral failing. But the Vikings did not live in our world. They lived in a world where the rules were different, where the stakes were different, and where the definition of cleanliness had to be reframed, redefined, adapted to the demands of survival. Let me be clear, the Vikings were not dirty people. They were not careless about hygiene. In fact, by the standards of their time, they were remarkably clean. They bathed regularly. They groomed themselves meticulously. They carried combs and tweezers and ear picks, tools of personal care that they used daily. But in winter, cleanliness took on a different meaning. It was not about washing away every trace of dirt and sweat. It was about maintaining the balance, about keeping the body functional, the layers effective, the system intact. And sometimes that meant leaving things alone, leaving the outer tunic unwashed, leaving the cloak heavy with lanolin and smoke, leaving the layers in place, even when they were damp, even when they smelled, even when they felt uncomfortable against the skin. Because washing in winter was not a neutral act. It was a risk, a disruption, a potential threat to the very system that was keeping you alive. Consider what happens when you wash wool. You take the fabric, saturated with lanolin, with the natural oils that make it water-resistant, and you immerse it in water. You scrub it with soap, breaking down the oils, stripping them away. The wool becomes cleaner, yes, but it also becomes weaker, less effective, more vulnerable to moisture. Without the lanolin, wool absorbs water more readily. It loses its ability to shed rain and snow. And when it gets wet, it stays wet, conducting heat away from the body instead of trapping it close. This is why the Vikings washed their inner layers, the linen shirts and undergarments, but not the outer layers. The linen was close to the skin, in direct contact with sweat and dead skin cells. It needed to be cleaned to prevent irritation, infection, the buildup of bacteria that could cause sores or rashes. But the wool was different. The wool did not touch the skin directly. It was protected by the linen layer beneath, and the lanolin in the wool, far from being a contaminant, was a defense. A molecular shield that kept moisture out and warmth in. So they left it. They brushed it to remove loose dirt and debris. They aired it, hanging it in the cold, dry air to let the UV light from the sun kill bacteria and freshen the fibers. But they did not wash it. Not in winter. Not when washing would mean stripping away the very properties that made it effective. This was a calculated choice. A choice that prioritized function over appearance, survival over comfort, and it was a choice that extended beyond clothing to the living space itself. The turf houses were not kept clean in the way we would recognize. The floors were earthen, covered with straw that absorbed moisture, absorbed waste from the animals, absorbed the detritus of daily life. The air was smoky, thick with the smell of burning peat and the exhalations of humans and livestock. But this was not neglect. This was adaptation. Because the smoke, the moisture, the animals, they all served a purpose. The smoke kept insects away, preserved food, treated the wool and leather against rot. The animals provided heat, their bodies radiating warmth into the shared space, raising the ambient temperature enough to make survival possible. The straw absorbed moisture, preventing it from pooling on the floor, from seeping into the walls, from creating pockets of damp that could harbor mold or disease. This was a different kind of cleanliness, not sterile, not dry, not odorless, but functional, balanced, adapted to the specific demands of the environment. And the people who lived in these spaces, who wore the same damp tunics day after day, were not suffering from a lack of hygiene. They were practicing a different kind of hygiene, one that recognized that in winter the enemy was not dirt. The enemy was cold, and that fighting cold required sacrifices, required a willingness to live with discomfort, with smells, with conditions that would be unacceptable in summer but were necessary in winter. This is a hard truth, a truth that goes against everything we have been taught about health and cleanliness. But it is a truth nonetheless, a truth born from the lived experience of people who survived in conditions that would kill most of us in a matter of hours. And it is a truth that has implications beyond the Viking world. Because even today, in extreme environments, the same logic applies. Mountaineers on long expeditions wear the same clothes for weeks, knowing that changing in the cold is dangerous. Polar explorers manage moisture and wind with the same care that the Vikings did, understanding that stability is more important than freshness. This is not regression. This is not a return to barbarism. It is recognition. Recognition that the rules change when the environment changes. That what is clean and safe in one context can be dangerous in another. And that survival requires us to let go of our assumptions, our preferences, our sense of what is normal, and adapt to the reality we are in. The Vikings understood this. They lived it, and in doing so, they created a culture of winter survival that was sophisticated, nuanced, deeply informed by observation and experience. They were not dirty. They were disciplined. They were not careless. They were careful. They prioritized what mattered and let go of what did not. And in the end, that discipline, that care, that willingness to prioritize stability over cleanliness was what allowed them to survive, to thrive, to build communities in places where no one else could, to cross oceans and settle new lands, and endure winters that would have broken a less adaptive people. This is what stability teaches us. That cleanliness is not absolute. It is contextual, and that in winter, in the cold, in the fight for survival, stability is the highest form of care. Now, let me share with you a practice that reveals the Viking understanding of hygiene in winter. It is a practice mentioned in several sagas and supported by archaeological evidence. It is the practice of the Saturday bath. In Old Norse, Saturday was called Lugadagur, which literally means washing day. This was the day when, even in winter, people made an effort to wash. But the washing was strategic. It was focused. It was not about changing clothes, but about cleaning the body itself. On Logadagur, families would heat water over the fire. Not a lot of water, because fuel was precious and heating water took time and energy, but enough for a basin, a cloth, a quick but thorough washing of the face, the hands, the hair. The emphasis was on the parts of the body that accumulated the most dirt and oil. The parts that, if left uncleaned, could cause problems. Rashes, infections, lice. The Vikings were particularly vigilant about lice, those tiny parasites that thrived in unwashed hair and could spread disease. Combing the hair with fine-toothed combs made of bone or antler was a daily ritual, and washing the hair weekly was considered essential. But the clothes stayed on, because washing the body and washing the clothes were two different tasks, with different risks and different benefits. The body could be washed without disrupting the thermal system. The clothes could not. This distinction is crucial. It shows that the Vikings did not equate personal cleanliness with clean clothes. They understood that you could be clean in the ways that mattered for health while wearing clothes that were far from pristine. And in fact, there is evidence that Viking personal hygiene was quite advanced for their time. In addition to weekly baths and daily combing, Vikings used a variety of grooming tools. They cleaned their teeth with wooden picks. They trimmed their nails with small iron scissors. They even used a form of soap made from animal fat and wood ash, which was effective at removing dirt and oil. All of this suggests a culture that valued cleanliness, but defined it in practical terms. Cleanliness was not about appearance. It was about health, about preventing disease, about maintaining the function of the body in a harsh environment. And in that context, wearing the same tunic for months was not unclean. It was prudent. It was a choice that prioritized one kind of health, thermal health, metabolic health, over another kind, aesthetic cleanliness. The Anglo-Saxon chroniclers who complained about Viking grooming habits were missing the point. They saw Vikings washing frequently and assumed it was vanity. But it was not vanity. It was survival. The Vikings washed their bodies because clean skin is healthy skin. But they did not wash their winter clothes because clean clothes in winter were often less effective clothes. This is the paradox of winter hygiene. That staying healthy sometimes means tolerating conditions that seem, by modern standards, unhealthy. That the path to survival runs counter to our instincts about what is clean and proper. And the Vikings, through generations of trial and error, through the harsh teacher of winter itself, learned to navigate this paradox. They learned when to wash and when to leave alone, when to change and when to keep wearing. They learned to trust their knowledge over their discomfort, their experience over their preferences. And in that trust, they found a way to live where others could not. They found a way to turn the frozen edges of the world into home. Let us continue into the final movements of this long winter night. Before we step into the stillness of the long winter days, I want to pause here for a moment. Just you and me. Let's sit with this idea of cleanliness and stability a little longer. In our world, the world you and I navigate every day, we are often exhausted by the demand for newness, aren't we? We are taught that to be worthy, we must be polished. We must show up every morning fresh, reinvented, with our flaws washed away and our armor shining. We feel a quiet shame when we are worn down, when our edges are frayed, when we carry the visible marks of yesterday's struggles. But look at the Viking in his winter tunic. Look closely. The stains on his wool are not marks of shame. They are a map of his survival. The smoke embedded in the fibers is the scent of the fire that kept his children warm. The lanolin and the oil are the shield that stood between him and the freezing death. There is a profound dignity in that unwashed state. It is the dignity of something that has served, something that has endured. I want you to think about this in the context of your own life right now as you lie in the dark. Perhaps you feel worn tonight. Perhaps you feel that you haven't been able to present a perfect, fresh version of yourself to the world lately. Maybe you feel heavy with the accumulation of your own winter, your worries, your fatigue, your old hurts that just won't wash away. The lesson from the North is this: you do not need to be shiny to be safe. You do not need to be new to be valid. Sometimes, the most heroic thing you can do is simply to keep your layers on, to accept that you are a little weathered, a little stained by life, and to realize that this very weathering is what protects you. It is your insulation. Imagine an elder Viking placing a hand on your shoulder. He doesn't care that your tunic is old. He cares that you are still standing. He cares that you are warm. He would tell you that the wear and tear on your soul is not a defect. It is proof that you have faced the wind and you have not broken. So, let go of the pressure to be clean in spirit tonight. Let go of the need to be perfect. Like the wool that remembers the shape of the wearer, let your experiences wrap around you. Be worn, be heavy, be safe. There is a quality to winter, especially the deep winter of the far north, that is hard to describe. A sameness, a stillness, a sense that time has slowed or stopped, or perhaps ceased to matter in the way it does in other seasons. The sun, if it rises at all, traces a low arc across the horizon, barely clearing the mountains, casting long shadows that do not move much before the light fades again into darkness. The snow, once it has fallen, stays. It does not melt. It accumulates, layer upon layer, until the landscape is smoothed, softened, all edges and contours erased. And in this world, where day and night blur together, where the outside is hostile and the inside is dim and smoky and unchanging, the rhythm of life slows, becomes repetitive, becomes, in a way, meditative. You wake, and the first thing you feel is the weight of the wool cloak you slept under. The same cloak you wore yesterday, the same cloak you will wear today. You sit up, and the tunic you are wearing, the one you have worn for weeks, shifts against your skin. It is damp as always, cool as always, but familiar, expected. You do not think about changing it. The thought does not even occur to you, because changing is not part of the rhythm. Changing is a disruption, and in winter, disruptions are to be avoided. You stand, you wrap the cloak tighter, you step outside into the cold and check the traps. The same traps you checked yesterday, the same path through the snow, the same wind in your face. You return, you sit by the fire, you eat the same food you ate yesterday. Dried fish, porridge, perhaps a little cheese if there is any left. And then the day passes, slowly, without event, without change, and when night comes, you lie down again in the same place, under the same cloak, wearing the same tunic, and you sleep. And when you wake, it is the same again. This sameness, this repetition, might seem unbearable to us, maddening, a kind of prison. But for the Vikings, it was something else. It was stability. It was the rhythm that allowed the body to adapt, to settle into a state of equilibrium where it did not have to constantly react, constantly adjust. When every day is the same, when every sensation is familiar, the body stops fighting. It stops wasting energy on the shock of the new, the discomfort of the unexpected. It learns to conserve, to endure, to simply be. And the clothing, the layers that are worn day after day without change, become a part of this rhythm. They are not garments anymore. They are a second skin, a boundary that is so familiar, so integrated, that you no longer notice it. You no longer feel the dampness, the weight, the smell. It is all background, all part of the system. This is adaptation at its deepest level, not just physical, but psychological. The mind, like the body, learns to accept, to stop resisting, to find peace in the constancy. And in that peace, there is a kind of strength, a resilience, because when you have stopped fighting against the discomfort, when you have accepted it as part of the condition of being alive in winter, you have freed up energy for other things. for noticing the subtle changes in the weather, for monitoring the health of the animals, for watching over your family, your community, ensuring that everyone is still functional, still safe. This is the gift of sameness, the gift of repetition. It is not excitement, it is not pleasure, but it is survival. And in winter, survival is enough. Let me take you deeper into this feeling. Let me show you how the days blurred together, how time became something other than what we understand it to be. You are sitting in the turf house. Outside, it is dark. It might be midday. It might be midnight. You cannot tell. The fire burns, as it always does. The sheep huddle in the corner, as they always do. Your family sits around the fire, silent, each lost in their own thoughts. No one speaks. There is nothing new to say. Everything that needs to be said has been said 100 times already. The stories have all been told. The jokes have all been made. And so you sit in silence, in stillness. And as you sit, you become aware of your breathing. In, out, slow, steady. You become aware of the weight of the cloak on your shoulders, the pressure of the tunic against your ribs, the faint itch of the wool against your neck. But you do not move to scratch it. You do not adjust the cloak. You simply notice, and then let it go. Because movement, unnecessary movement, is a disruption. And in winter, you have learned to minimize disruption. This is a kind of meditation, a forced mindfulness, not chosen, but imposed by the conditions of survival. And in it, there is a strange clarity, a simplicity, because when there is nothing to do, when there is nowhere to go, when the only task is to endure, the mind settles. It stops racing. It stops seeking distraction. It rests. And in that rest, you begin to notice things, small things, the way the firelight flickers, the sound of the wind outside, rising and falling in a pattern that you have come to recognize, the smell of the sheep, the smoke, the dampness, all of it familiar, all of it part of the texture of winter. And you realize, in a way that is not quite conscious, that you are okay, that you are surviving, that the sameness, far from being a burden, is a comfort. Because sameness means nothing has gone wrong. Sameness means the system is holding. Sameness means you are still here. This is the psychology of winter survival. Not dramatic, not heroic, but patient, enduring, accepting of the slow, quiet passage of days that feel the same, because sameness is safety. And the clothing, the layers that are worn without change, are a symbol of this. They are a reminder that in winter, the goal is not progress. The goal is not improvement. The goal is simply to continue, to maintain, to let each day be like the last, until the season turns and the sun returns and the rhythm can change again. But we are not there yet. We are still in the depths, still in the long, dark middle, where the end is not visible, where hope is not a feeling, but a decision, a choice to believe that spring will come, even when there is no evidence of it. And in that choice, In that quiet, stubborn faith, the Vikings found the strength to endure, to wear the same damp tunic, to sit in the same smoky house, to walk the same path through the snow, day after day, week after week, until it was over. This is what sameness teaches us. That survival is not about constant change, constant adaptation. Sometimes survival is about staying the same, about finding a rhythm and holding to it, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is boring, even when it feels like it will never end. Because it will end. Winter always ends, but it only ends for those who make it through, and making it through requires patience, discipline, the willingness to let days blur together, to let time lose its urgency, to simply be present, breath by breath, moment by moment. In those blurred days, I imagine Astrid or Thorhall pausing by the fire, not just enduring, but pondering their place in it all. What am I, if not this enduring shell? They might whisper to themselves. Now, let me share with you a moment from the sagas that captures this quality of winter sameness. It is a brief passage from the saga of the people of Laxardal, describing a winter in Iceland in the late 10th century. The saga tells of a woman named Gudrun, one of the great figures of Icelandic literature, spending a winter at a remote farmstead. The saga says simply, that winter passed slowly. The days were all alike. They sat by the fire and spoke little. When spring came, it was as if waking from a long dream. That is all. No drama, no crisis. Just the acknowledgement that winter was a time when days blurred together, when life became a kind of waiting, a holding pattern until the season turned. And in that holding pattern, clothing played a crucial role, because the clothes you wore became, in a sense, the boundary of your existence. They defined the space you occupied. They mediated between your body and the cold world outside. And because they did not change, because you wore them day after day, they became part of the sameness, part of the rhythm, part of the meditation of winter. To change them would have been to break the rhythm, to introduce variability into a system that depended on constancy. And so, they were not changed. They were kept, worn, trusted, until finally, when spring came and the warmth returned, they could be set aside. But even then, the transition was gradual, because spring in the north does not arrive all at once. It comes in fits and starts. A warm day followed by a cold snap. The snow melting, then freezing again. The sun growing stronger, but the wind still carrying a bite. And in this uncertain time, the winter clothing stayed on. Because to take it off too soon, to trust in the false spring, was to risk everything all over again. Better to wait. Better to let the season prove itself. Better to keep the same layers, the same system, until there was no doubt that winter was truly over. This patience, this refusal to be fooled by the first signs of warmth, was another form of wisdom, another lesson learned through hard experience. Because the Vikings knew that spring could be as dangerous as winter in its own way, that the transition time, when the ice was melting and the temperatures were swinging wildly, was when mistakes were most likely to happen. And so they waited. They kept their winter clothes. They maintained the system. And only when the earth was soft, when the grass was growing, when the midnight sun had returned, and there was no more frost, did they finally shed the layers that had kept them alive. And even then, those layers were not discarded. They were cleaned, carefully, in the now warm water. They were mended where they had worn thin. They were treated with fresh lanolin. They were folded and stored in wooden chests, ready for the next winter, because those clothes had value. Not just monetary value, though wool and linen were expensive, but experiential value. They had been tested. They had proven themselves. They had kept their wearer alive through the harshest conditions, and that made them precious. This is what the sameness of winter days teaches us, that there is value in constancy, that repetition is not the enemy of survival, but its ally, that the willingness to wear the same clothes, to follow the same rhythms, to accept the slow passage of identical days is not a sign of giving up. It is a sign of deep adaptation, of understanding what it takes to persist in a world that does not forgive mistakes. Let us move now toward the end of our journey, where we will gather the threads of this long story and see what they reveal about the human capacity to endure. And now we come to the end, but not the end you might expect. Not a triumphant emergence into spring, not a moment of renewal, of fresh clothes and warm baths, and the shedding of winter's weight. Because for the Vikings, winter did not end with a single moment. It ended slowly, gradually. The days lengthened, but the cold remained. The snow began to melt, but the ground stayed frozen, and the clothing, the layers that had been worn for months, stayed on. There was no moment of changing, no ritual of discarding the old and putting on the new, because the transition from winter to spring was not sharp. It was blurred, uncertain, and to strip away the layers too soon, before the warmth was truly established, was to risk everything all over again. So they waited. They wore the same tunic, the same cloak, through the first thaw, through the false springs that brought rain and wind, and temperatures that swung wildly between freezing and mild. They waited until the earth was truly soft, until the sun was truly warm, until they could be certain that the cold would not return. And only then, when the risk had passed, did they finally remove the layers. Did they wash the wool in the streams, now flowing with meltwater? Did they hang the fabric to dry in the sun, letting the UV light restore it, freshen it, prepare it for storage until the next winter? This was the rhythm, not a cycle of constant renewal, but a slow, patient transition, a recognition that the seasons do not turn on a schedule, that the body must be protected until the very last threat has passed. And in this, there is a lesson that extends far beyond the practicalities of clothing and survival. The lesson is this: that stability, once achieved, should not be abandoned lightly, that the systems we build to protect ourselves, to keep ourselves functional, to endure through hardship, are precious, fragile, not to be dismantled the moment we feel the first hint of relief. Because relief in the natural world is often temporary. The warmth of a sunny day can be followed by a cold snap. The promise of spring can be broken by a late storm. And if we have let go of our defenses too soon, if we have disrupted the equilibrium that kept us safe, we may not be able to rebuild it in time. This is true of clothing, but it is also true of other things, of habits, of routines, of the mental and emotional disciplines that help us endure difficult times. When we are in the depths, we build systems, we adapt, we find rhythms that work, that keep us functional, that allow us to continue. And those rhythms may not be comfortable. They may not be what we want, but they are what we need. And when the hard time begins to ease, when we start to see signs of relief, our instinct is to abandon those rhythms immediately, to change everything, to shed the weight of discipline and return to comfort. But that instinct, natural as it is, can be dangerous, because we may be wrong about the relief. The hard time may not be over, and if we dismantle our defenses too soon, we may find ourselves unprepared for what comes next. The Vikings understood this. They did not celebrate the first thaw. They did not strip off their cloaks the first time the sun felt warm. They waited. They watched. They let the season prove itself before they let go of the systems that had kept them alive. This patience, this discipline, is rare in our modern world. We live in a culture of instant gratification, of rapid change, of constant renewal. We are encouraged to reinvent ourselves, to discard the old and embrace the new, to never settle, never stay still. But the Vikings teach us something different. They teach us that there is wisdom in staying the course, in trusting the systems we have built, in not being too quick to change, even when change feels appealing. They teach us that stability is not stagnation, that wearing the same tunic for weeks, for months, is not a failure. It is a strategy, a choice, a way of honoring the equilibrium that has been so carefully, so painfully established. And they teach us that the end of hardship is not a single moment. It is a process, a gradual transition, and that the wisest path is not to rush through it, but to move through it slowly, carefully, with the same patience and discipline that got us through the hardship itself. So as we come to the end of this story, I want to leave you with that thought, that there is no dramatic moment of renewal, no clean break between winter and spring, only a slow, patient emergence, a continuation of the rhythm, even as the rhythm begins to change. The Vikings wore their tunics, they kept their cloaks, they maintained their systems, and when the warmth finally came, when it was truly safe, they let go. But not before. And in that patience, in that discipline, they survived year after year, generation after generation, in a place where survival was never guaranteed, where winter was a force to be reckoned with, where the smallest mistake could be fatal. They survived by understanding that clothing was not separate from the body, that the layers they wore were not just fabric, but part of themselves, that moisture and sweat and wind were not just inconveniences, but forces to be managed, to be respected, to be worked with rather than against. And they survived by choosing stability over cleanliness, patience over comfort, endurance over excitement. This is their gift to us, this knowledge, this wisdom. And as you lie here, in the warmth and safety of the modern world, I hope you can feel it. The weight of that wisdom, the depth of that experience, the quiet, stubborn strength of people who lived in a world so different from ours, yet so essential to who we are. Because we are their descendants, not just genetically, but culturally, spiritually. The patience they practiced, the discipline they embodied, the systems they built, these are still within us, waiting to be called upon, waiting to be remembered. And so, as you drift towards sleep, let this story settle into you. Let it become part of your dreams, not as a tale of hardship, but as a reminder of resilience, of the human capacity to adapt, to endure, to find warmth even in the coldest places. Let it remind you that you too have this capacity, that when the hard times come, you can build systems, you can adapt, you can find rhythms that work, and you can trust them, even when they are uncomfortable, even when they feel like they will never end. Because they will end. All things end. But what matters is how we move through them, with patience, with discipline, with the quiet, steady faith that we can endure. This is the lesson of the Vikings. This is the lesson of winter, and it is a lesson worth carrying with you into the night, into your dreams, into whatever challenges lie ahead. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Thank you for your patience, your presence, your willingness to sit with this story, to let it unfold slowly, to find meaning in the details. I hope it has brought you some measure of peace, some sense of connection, not just to the past, but to the vast, patient rhythms of human survival that have carried us through millennia. And as you close your eyes, as you let sleep take you, know that you are not alone. You are part of something larger, something older, something that has endured for thousands of years and will endure for thousands more. We often speak of winter as a season of the earth, but you and I both know that winter visits the heart too. There are times in our lives when the sun feels distant, when the winds of grief or anxiety blow cold, and when we feel isolated in our own internal longhouses. When those times come, and they come to us all, remember the wisdom of the tunic. Modern advice will tell you to shake it off, to start fresh, to force a spring that hasn't arrived yet. But the Vikings would tell you, do not change your clothes in the storm. When you are going through a dark time, give yourself permission to stop changing. Stop trying to improve. Stop trying to fix everything at once. It is okay to just maintain. It is okay to wrap yourself in your habits, your comforts, even your sadness, and just let them protect you for a while. Do not tear away your defenses because you think you should be better by now. Wait for the true warmth. Wait until you feel the ground soften inside you. You are not failing by standing still. You are not failing by protecting your core heat. You are surviving. And survival, my friend, is a quiet, holy work. So, whatever winter you are carrying tonight, respect it. Don't fight the cold naked. Keep your layers close. I am right here with you, watching the fire, waiting for the spring that will, inevitably, undeniably, come. Rest well, traveler. May the layers you wear, literal or metaphorical, keep you warm through whatever winters lie ahead. And may you have the wisdom to know when to hold them close, and when, finally, it is safe to let them go. Until we meet again, in another story, in another quiet night, I remain your companion in the darkness, Peter Miller, and I bid you the gentlest of good nights. Sleep now. The winter cannot touch you here. You are safe. You are warm. And you are deeply, profoundly understood. Good night.